is I lived with a nurse for many, many years. And I just felt in awe with the work she's doing every day. Like people have these like very abstract or simplistic ideas of the work of nurses. But when you get in touch with somebody who does this on a daily basis and you're very close, you could just see how they're really involved with very deeply existential subjects on a daily basis as a job, like with death and life and hope and sickness and loneliness. And I just always felt like my work that I was doing, like screenwriting, felt really banal, compared to what she was doing every day.
Benvenuti a una nuova puntata di Ordine di Opinioni, il podcast dell'Ordine delle Professioni Infermieristiche di Bologna. Nuova puntata, nuovi argomenti, nuovi ospiti, spero che sia una piacevole chiacchierata. Io sono Guglielmo Imbriaco, sono un infermiere di Bologna e questa sera sono veramente lieto di essere qui con voi. Se non lo avete ancora fatto, iscrivetevi ai canali social di Ordine di Opinioni su YouTube, su Spotify, Amazon Music, Instagram, TikTok, così potete ascoltare il podcast mentre siete imbottigliati nel traffico o mentre fate la spesa. Questa sera ci accompagna in collegamento dalla Toscana Nicola Drauli, responsabile della comunicazione della Federazione Nazionale OPI. Nicola, ciao, grazie della tua partecipazione.
Grazie a voi, salve a tutti.
Ci divertiremo, sarà una bella chiacchierata.
Sicuro.
Allora Nicola, so che hai fatto, oltre al tuo lavoro standard, hai fatto una recensione recentemente.
Sì, allora io ho una delega politica, ovviamente per la FNOPI poi lavorano giornalisti ed esperti di comunicazione. Però in realtà noi già sapevamo di questo film, L'ultimo turno, ne avevamo già sentito parlare un po' e ad un certo punto siamo entrati in contatto con la BIM Distribuzione, che in Italia ha distribuito appunto il film, che ci ha detto: ma avete voglia, vogliamo vederlo insieme, così ci dite cosa ne pensate voi come infermieri. Per noi è stata un'occasione bella, devo dire che fortunatamente accade sempre più spesso che ci chiedono anche opinioni riguardo a determinate produzioni artistiche, però una volta che abbiamo visto in anteprima quel film, io e il giornalista Silvestro Giannantonio abbiamo deciso di scrivere una recensione in anteprima perché bella, sentita, perché lo merita, e così anche da poter dare un po' di volano, di incuriosire anche i colleghi a vederlo.
Bene. I giornali hanno scritto tanto su questo film. Tra uno degli aspetti che ho letto molto, molto sentito è un film di rara umanità. Confesso, ho visto il film e concordo con questa frase. Un altro giornale riporta: è un film che mostra l'equilibrio e indaga la vita con dignità e complessità. Mi trovo perfettamente in accordo con queste parole. E a questo punto penso che i nostri ascoltatori abbiano intuito chi è l'ospite di questa serata. L'ospite è Petra Volpe, la regista del film L'ultimo turno. Adesso facciamo un piccolo shift, parliamo un po' in inglese con Petra. And welcome Petra. Thank you for your time. This is a real pleasure and also an honor to have you here with us. And thank you again for the opportunity.
The honor is mine. Thank you for having me. Possiamo parlare un po' di italiano, però non è perfetto.
You speak Italian and better than I speak in English. So
certain
you
things
speak
will be
Italian
difficult.
better than some Italian.
Whoa, yeah, that's true. Petra, first of all, we feel, me and Nicola, I think we feel a huge responsibility because we are representing nurses, not only for Bologna or Italy, I think, but also for the whole world, because your movie is a sort of manifesto of our profession. And I hope that our chat may express our gratitude for your job. And my first question is, why did you choose to make a movie around a nurse?
I think the original reason is I lived with a nurse for many, many years. And I just felt in awe with the work she's doing every day. Like people have these like very abstract or simplistic ideas of the work of nurses. But when you get in touch with somebody who does this on a daily basis and you're very close, you could just see how they're really involved with very deeply existential subjects on a daily basis as a job, like with death and life and hope and sickness and loneliness. And I just always felt like my work that I was doing, like screenwriting, felt really banal, compared to what she was doing every day. And I felt there is very little respect and consciousness around this in people's heads, because people have very, simplistic ideas also based on television shows. Usually the doctor is the main character in the show and the nurse is somewhere in the background helping the doctor a little bit, hanging up an IV or falling in love with the doctor. But you never actually see the work depicted in an authentic way, what actually the responsibility, the complexity of the work is. So that stayed with me for many years. And then COVID came, and COVID was so traumatic for healthcare workers, for nurses. I was in New York and I remember, everybody was clapping on the balcony. And we saw images from the hospitals. We saw the bodies piling up in the street. Just next to mine was a cooling truck with dead bodies. And I knew people are working in these wards and trying to help them, and seeing people die in this kind of like extreme way. And again, I was like, this is such a huge and important work for our society. And when COVID was gone, everybody forgot about it again. And then, of course, it was always in the media because there's a shortage of nurses everywhere globally. You saw the numbers in my film, but this, like, there's a huge shortage of nurses in Italy, in the UK, in France, in Germany, in Switzerland, like all over the world. And I feel it was very abstract for a lot of people. What does it actually mean, not enough nurses? And we really wanted to make a movie to show what it means for the nurse, but also for the patients when there's a shortage of personnel. So it was definitely, for me, a love declaration to nurses, but also a cry to arms. A battle cry.
Yes. You said, you told about the pandemic. The pandemic was a danger for us.
Yeah, and I remember Italy was the first, and my father was actually in Italy when it broke out, and he came back really, really sick because he always goes to Abruzzo, to Farafigli Rompetri, where they have this traditional feast. And he went and he traveled through Milan and he barely made it back to Switzerland. He was so sick. And nobody knew what he had. He couldn't breathe. So he came back from Italy when it just started in Italy. He came back in Switzerland. The doctor sent him home, and then they had to bring him to the hospital and they quarantined him, but he didn't know he had COVID, but I'm pretty sure he had COVID. And then we saw all these terrible, terrible images from Italy, that terrified the world. And I remember that intensely, and the nurses dying in Italian hospitals, and it was very devastating.
It's still a sad memory.
Yes, and nobody talks about it. It's PTSD. A lot of nurses were really deeply traumatized. Also in Switzerland, the nurses who helped me, who were my consultants, or many nurses I met, they said, I haven't really processed this. I've never worked in a ward where 8 people would die in a day. I've never experienced anything like that. And people moved on and forgot it, and the nurses were left by themselves with this trauma to deal with. Yes. People think it's normal, you see dead people every day, but that's not true. Like a death is still always a big...
You think it's normal until you touch it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is, of course, normal, but it's always a big event, you know?
Yes.
It's not something that just happens, but we can talk about this a little bit later when we talk about the end of the movie and why I chose this ending.
Yes, I have a question about it. Well,
Mm.
I watched the movie last month, and the details, I love the details. The way Flori moves, the way she does things, the gestures, and our gestures, and our times, and the sounds. You captured almost perfectly the life of a hospital ward. And how did you capture that?
Um, our aim was to really make a movie that's not just a movie, but a physical experience. We wanted people to really feel when they watch the movie how Floria feels doing this work. Because I
I was
think,
with her. I was working with her. That was
yes,
the
and
feeling.
and people who are not nurses, they feel so stressed out and they say, how can they do this every day? And I say, yeah, exactly. Ask yourself that, when she says she's showing up the next day, she might have another shift like that. So we wanted to make that very clear for people who are not nurses, what nurses actually do and the extreme pressure they're under, but also the immense responsibility they have. That they're not just assistants, that they're the really main people on a ward. Like they are the people who are closest to the patients. They see if something changes in the patient's state and health. It's not the doctor who comes in the morning to do his rounds. It's the nurse who sees if the person has a different skin color, if she's sweating, if she's confused, and so for us, it was really important to do a lot of research. So we said if the film is about a nurse and her work, every detail has to be precise because nurses are also a very hard audience. If they see a mistake, you failed,
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yes, so I had so many people helping me. So the story is also inspired by a book. So when I'm thinking about how to tell the story about a nurse, that took many years. But then I read a book by Madeleine Calvelage, who is a German nurse, and she describes just one shift in her book. And I thought, this is the movie. It's just one shift. It's one woman, one shift. And with that, you can show everything about the job, but you can show also everything what's wrong with the system, the circumstances. And so she became a consultant on the script, but I also had a Swiss nurse helping me. I had doctors. And then I went to the hospital myself to really see how do nurses move? What is the rhythm of the work? What are the actual tasks they're doing? Like preparing medication is such a big part of the work. While 3 telephones are ringing and 5 patients are waiting, you have to measure little millimeters and millimeters. And that's, it's intense. And so that's why you see this a lot in a movie also. And you never see that in television shows, how much time it takes to prepare medication. You don't just take a pill. You have to dilute it. You have to measure it. You have to put it into devices. And
Yes.
so we had a nurse consultant then on the set every day. She was an ICU nurse who had worked in a hospital for 25 years. And she trained Leonie, our actress, like an athlete, actually. And she sat with me at the monitor and watched every single take. And if we had any kind of questions, we would even involve the nurses union, the head of the union, and ask, hey, can we do this? Is this correct? Or so we really wanted to make sure that we show it as accurately as possible.
Nicola, I felt the pressure of a shift. I don't know if for you was the same, but the female patient waiting for the antibiotics. I, I was thinking about when does she will administer the antibiotic. The pressure of a real shift. Yes, that's the main point, I think, of the movie. And Great. You were great in condensing a shift, 8 hours, 6 hours, 10 hours, I don't know, in less than 2 hours. It was. I don't know if it was it hard to condense it.
Yes, that was a big challenge because we had to make really very conscious decisions about what do we show and what don't we show, because of course we can't show all the 8 hours, but we wanted to make people feel like they've experienced 8 hours. So we had to, and also like to measure how long does it take to change an IV, how long does it take to empty the urine, all the activity that nurses do, like how long do they take and what of all of that do we show so it seems like it's seamless. So that a lot of work went into that in the screenplay already, but then also when we were staging the movie. And so that was a particular challenge. And then the other thing that was really important was how to create an emotionality, because the problem is exactly that if you don't have time for your patients, because there is no time, how do you connect to them? How do you have a moment of humanity, of empathy? How do you find that time? And of course, in the movie is very much about emotions and empathy. And if our decision was to always be with the nurse and not stay with the patient story longer than she can stay with them, to show exactly she can't stay with the woman who has cancer because she has to do something else. So she can't, but she does try to fight for these little moments of empathy, like singing with the old lady, talking, looking at the dog of the older patients, the gentleman. But she has to fight for every second to have time to with her patients. And of course for the film that's also risky, because then people can't emotionally connect longer than she can, and to find these pockets of connection and emotionality combined with the extreme pressure, that was also something we worked on a lot in the editing.
Nicola?
Yes, you have captured many aspects of the profession, and you say just one that is so important: the time. We always say each other, we don't have time, we don't have enough time, but really, sometimes. No, every day, the time in our profession is just a contact eyes, is just a smile, is just a hand. Is a time, is a different time of the normal life. I don't know how to explain in English, but in Greece we say there is Chronos, the time that's go on normally, and Kairos, the time that is good for the moment, for the situation. We can measure with the hour and with the minute. We measure with something different.
Hard. I think you say something really, really important, because I mean, the antagonist in the story is the lack of time, right? She doesn't really have time. She wants to have more time with her patients. And that was something that really struck me when I did the research with the nurses in Switzerland. I did dozens and dozens of interviews. And when I talked about what is the most frustrating thing for you, what makes you not want to do your job anymore, it wasn't the money. Even though everybody says, of course, I want to make more money, the pay is not fair for the job we do. But the first thing they usually said is, I don't have the time to do my work anymore in the way I feel as a human being. I want to do my job to help people. So I don't mind stress, but if the stress is so high that I go home in the evening and I have to be scared that I made a mistake, that I can't relax because I know that this lady, I should have stayed there a little longer and I couldn't go into her room because I had to go in 10 other rooms, or I couldn't, finish my round. And you go home, you have the stress and the feeling you couldn't really do your job. That was really hard. And it's a form of emotional and moral injury that happens to nurses all the time. And there's a terminology and there's a lot of research around it, that this kind of moral injury is really harming nurses, like it's very hard to deal with this emotionally. And so we really wanted to show that. And I mean, also in the movie, I found this saying by Susan Sontag, who says, when you become sick, you become a citizen of another country. And it's so true. I think there is not a more lonely place than a hospital for a patient, even though maybe somebody visits you, you're still there alone with your illness, your fears. The nights in hospitals are, I think, very lonely. You can't sleep. You're all alone. Nobody is with you, with your sickness and with you. You're alone. When you're sick, you're very, very alone. And I think the one person who can be with you and maybe has some form of understanding and has, is really in this country with you is the nurses. And that's why I think, better conditions, work conditions for nurses are in the best interest actually for patients. That if we fight for better conditions for nurses, we fight for better outcomes for ourselves.
We,
Petra, excuse me, Gabriel, just one thing. I'm curious about Switzerland. Switzerland for Italian for our is like a meat, a place when you can earn a lot and work much better than Italy. So for see when I read that this picture, this movie is in Switzerland, and then I saw it, I was surprised because I understand that the question nursing, the nursing issue, I thought with some difference, is the same around the world, to the world. The entire world has shortage and needs to develop the nursing workforce. And we read that every day. The OMS, the World Health Organization, say that the nursing issue is a world issue, but to see a picture, a movie that is in Switzerland, and see the same problem, the same question, the same that we live every day. It's for me a revelation. I don't know if I'm saying the correct way. It is a great surprise and a great confirm.
You
Yeah.
perfectly realized a new word, a clean word, and without nurses, without adequate staff of personnel. And this is an issue. Hospitals are not the walls, the beds, the line, and it's about staff. And it remembers the COVID, the pandemic, when there was a struggle to buy beds and ventilators, and someone said intensive care is not about beds and ventilators, but about healthcare professionals, physicians and nurses that are able to manage it. And you depicted perfectly this situation. We may have the structures, the words, but without staff, we can't do our job. And our job is difficult because we as healthcare professionals, we are with people during the whole life, from their childbirth to the death. And the time to stay with a person, to, as Nicola said, even a touch, even touching the end of a patient for 10 seconds is care.
Yeah, I mean, we very, very consciously show a very nice hospital because in Switzerland, it's not a question of money. The money, it's a question of priorities, how the money is spent. And in Switzerland, they rather spend it on nice hospitals and the latest MRI technology and whatever. But that doesn't help you if there's no nurse, And so for us, it was very, very, we wanted really to show a nice hospital. It's not ugly. Things are working. The beds are good. The walls are not coming down, But in the end, it's, as you say, and you too, Nicola, it's really about the work. It's about the work of the nurses. And if they're not there, the best technology doesn't help you. And And in Switzerland, we have this shortage of nurses very acutely, maybe not as dramatic as in Germany and Italy, but it's very shameful for a rich country like Switzerland to have this problem. There has been, after COVID, there has been an initiative that the nurses union was able to finally bring before the people to vote on. So they had been fighting for it for many, many years and said, this is a crisis. It's getting worse and worse. The politicians didn't take them seriously. When COVID came, everybody was very aware of it, and the union used this moment and said, now maybe the people are going to support our cause because they realize how important we are. And sure enough, finally, the Swiss people voted to accept this initiative to better the conditions for the nurses. But then the government has to implement it, and there were two phases. So the first phase was investing more money in education. But the nurses union says that's not enough, because it's not enough to train nurses, and there is plenty of young people who still want to learn this job. But if they're burned out after 4 years on the job because the conditions are so bad, that doesn't help. We need to better the work conditions for the nurses. They need better pay, better. There needs to be a rule about nurse-patient ratio. There needs all these things that they ask for. And this second phase now, they're not implementing in Switzerland. And it's the politicians who don't want to do it because they say it costs money. And the argument is always the money, but it's a fake argument. In Switzerland, it's not about the money. And they always use the money argument. It's a question of priority. And it's interesting that I'm talking to two male nurses today, because 80% of the people who work in nursing are women in Switzerland, in Germany. In the UK, it's 90%. And it's very symptomatic that for work that are predominantly done by women, it's just not taken seriously. It's just not. It's always at the bottom of the political agenda,
I don't know. Was the movie also released in the US? And if so,
It will be
okay.
next year. Yeah.
Okay, next year. I would like to ask you the feedback from the American audience, but okay. See you next year for this question.
Yeah. We just, it's going to be released February, March. And it's interesting because already now I've got so many requests on LinkedIn by American Nurses Association, American nursing schools, who are like, we want to see this movie. When is it coming out? They're very interested in seeing it and using it in schools.
I'd like to ask you one thing. The title of the movie. The title in German is Heldin. It means heroine. Okay, and as you said before, we don't like being called heroes. And in Italy, the title was translated as The Last Shift, L'ultimo turno, and it's quite. I don't know. These are not the right words, probably, and I have to admit, I was watching Flori during the movie. She was rushing more and more and more, trying to do everything. And there was a couple of moments where I thought she may do something extreme. I feared for Flori in a couple of moments. And what do you think of this translation of the title?
Well, in German, the title Heldin is very unambiguous. When I said the film is called Heldin, everybody knows it's a female hero. And I knew that in the nursing community in Germany, this was a very controversial word, because they say, we don't want to be called heroes. We just want to make better pay, But I called it, because from my perspective, and I'm a potential patient, for me, these nurses and the nurses globally are everyday heroes. I feel this term is always reserved for war heroes, for male heroes, for superheroes in movies. But for me, actual heroes are people who do this job. So for me, it was really, I did it also a little bit provocatively, but it was my feeling towards them. And then the problem with the word in English, but probably also in Italian, if you say, "Oh, I made a movie and it's called Heroin," everybody thinks it's about the drug. And I didn't want to have to explain, well, it's not heroin, not the drug, it's heroine, female hero. So we try to find titles that are, not so ambiguous and more clear. And in France, it's called En Première Ligne, which means in the
front line.
In the front line, which I like a lot. And in English, I like Late Shift because it's very clean and it's very, and it is, a late shift. And I don't know how people feel about the Italian title. L'ultimo turno sounds a little bit like she's gonna die afterwards.
The latest shift.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, but
well, you have to know, Petra, that our federation trying in the past, we tried to do something similar with a spettacolo teatrale, il teatro in inglese come Guglielmo?
Theater.
Theater.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a theater piece.
In the theater, and translate, it was the la notte di Capodanno, quindi
the year of the new year.
So, yes, and we describe a normal day, a normal night of work, and in Italy we try to speak. We tried to speak with some director or producer, and always they said, "Find us an exceptional nurse, an heroic nurse," and we said, "No, we have to talk about nursing. We have to talk about just nursing because the nursing is exceptional, and you did it, and we thank you for that because we tried for so many years to find an artistical product, theater or cinema or anything else that speak about a normal day because it's so exceptional in this era so poor of humanity, so poor of issue.
I mean, we really approached the film as a thriller because for me, I remember when I was reading Madeleine's book, even though I knew the work my the nurse I was living with was doing, but reading Madeleine's book, after 5 minutes, my heart was racing. I remember I was lying on my sofa and she was just describing a normal shift. And I was like, holy shit, this reads like a thriller, like a real thriller, like an action movie. I said, this is an action film. And that's how we made the movie. We thought we are making an action movie. So, and she's an action hero. Because also when we went to do the research, what we observed there, the way they're always moving, they're never standing still, they're always doing something, there's always 5 things happening. It's almost like a computer game that you can't win. That were associations we had when we were researching, and then also for the movie, we saw her as a high performing athlete, mental and physical athlete, but also a computer game character who has to put out fires everywhere. And we thought people love to do these games. Why shouldn't they love to watch this movie? But of course the movie then has a very serious base. And but for example, we didn't know if the nurses want to see this movie. My producers were worried that, first of all, who wants to see the reality of the situation of nurses? Like, it's scaring people. And second, the nurses come home in the evening. They don't want to go see a movie and watch what they did all day. They want to see a romance or a melodrama. Good. But it's interesting. The opposite was it. They felt like finally somebody gets it. And they really, I remember I went to so many screenings in Switzerland in the beginning. It was always full with nurses. And it was very emotional because they said, we never feel seen. We feel invisible in society, and this film makes us visible. And they said, and we're going to send all our relatives and husbands and children because nobody really understands what we're doing. They don't understand why we're tired in the evening, why we're grumpy in the evening, why we want to be left alone and not go out, don't want to party. And they say, well, it's just a job, but it's not just a job. It's an extraordinary job. You are in touch with life and death every day. Who has that? A bank teller doesn't, a shoe seller doesn't, and we take it for granted. We think and it's not. It's a miracle that there are people who do this job for us, and we have to be grateful to them every day. And if a society wouldn't be a turbo-capitalist society, the value of this job would be at the top of society and not at the bottom, because they care for the most vulnerable people, for the sick and the old, And if you think about what's really valuable in society, this is the most highest value, people caring for other people who need help. What higher thing is there, especially if we are Christians? And in Italy, with all the Catholics, they should be celebrating nurses. They should be putting all the support. The Pope should be help the nurses. No, really. Like if we're talking about empathy and serving people, this is it,
But
Yeah.
you do not
You see, I feel
understand.
very passionate about it.
No. Peter, when I talk to someone that's not a nurse, I always say, with this job, you can live so many lives and not only yours. But it's a value that we're going to lose in our society, like you said. But I want to say that many orders, the Association of Nursing in Italy, that we have one for city, we are, and in Italy are organized and organizing screening, and they are full of nurses, also citizens. So you win the deal.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, as you said before, I think you said it, the nurse is very often the first and the last person to touch us, So it's really an issue that is very relevant to every person's life,
Yes, I totally agree. And Petra, what about Leonie?
Tell her. She will be very honored.
She perfectly represented our daily life. From the beginning, when in the changing room, she and their colleague talk about the comfortable shoes, not too expensive. Is a detail, but is extremely real for us.
Yeah.
How did she manage to get into the character?
I mean, Leonie is an unbelievably, she's a wonder of an actress. She's very physical. And when I talked with her about the role, I said, this is not a psychological role. She's not a nurse with an agenda. This is a woman who just wants to do a good job, because this is the kind of nurses I met in research. They're not like in the movie, oh, it's kind of the twisted nurse who has some psychological problems and wants to have power over people or has a helping syndrome. Most nurses I met just wanted to do a good job and help people and love the job. Also, like the action of it. And so we said it's not a psychological role. She doesn't have an agenda. She doesn't have a personal problem she's taking out on the patients. She comes to the job, she comes to her shift, and she's motivated, she's highly professional, she loves her job, and she wants to do a good job. So Leonie really loved that because she go very psychological, and she loved the idea of playing somebody who's very, very physical and very pragmatic and very and connecting to people and patients on a very direct and empathetic level. So that for her was very attractive as an actress to do. And then she was so ambitious because she knew if the nurses see me making mistakes, I will not be forgiven. So she really, and she had so much respect for the work also, because she also went to the hospital for a week observing the rhythm, how they move, how they talk amongst each other, how do they talk to the patients, like what is the choreography of the work, how do they move the cart, you know. She had to train all of that like a dancer, and we said she's an athlete, or she's like a skater, an ice skater. That's why we had like a white floor in the hospital. We saw it as an ice rink, and she's one of those high speed ice skaters. So she approached it and way. And then she had Nadia, our consultant, who really trained her like an athlete. So she would repeat these, preparing a syringe or preparing medication. Like she would do it over and over and over again. She would take all the things, like all the syringes, home to her hotel room and just do it until she could do it. Just watch television and she could do it, because she had the ambition to look like somebody who does it for 10 years, and you have to have a lot of practice.
And she did it.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nicola?
And I think Leonie, she's so present. She really has this kind of empathy and warmth without being sentimental. That was also important for us, because nurses are, the nurses I met, they're very, very empathetic, and they're there, but they're not sentimental. They are not, there's something very,
Well, it's a form of
very
protection.
Yeah,
Sometimes it's a form of protection. We try to hide our emotions as a sort of protection. Yes.
And you
It's part
can't
of the
show the
job.
patient. Yeah, exactly. And we wanted to show that, how she's really professional at doing that, but that she also really feels something for the patients. So, and she is just such an she just understood, I think, from also the research and observing the nurses, what that thin line between giving and being there, but also protecting yourself, how to create that authentically.
Yes. Nicola?
What can I say? For passion and for work, I watched so many artistic production in the healthcare field, and I think that Leonie is simply the best performance by a nurse in a movie. Stop. I don't have anything else to say about this question.
Absolutely.
It is so extraordinary, really, really, really.
So, Leonie, but also Petra are honorary nurses.
Oh yes, both.
Well, thank you.
Both, yes.
I feel very honored. Thank you.
So your shift begins tomorrow morning at 7 a.m.
Yes, I'm all for it. I mean, my parents both worked in the hospital. I was always drawn to the medical world. But my mother was a secretary. I also worked in a hospital when I was a student for a lung and a hospital for old people, and I saw my first dead person there. And my father worked in sanitation. So, and he had very much pride, because he said sanitation and hygiene is very important in a hospital, and you have to do it properly. And so, they spent their whole lives in a hospital milieu.
Petra, I have one last question, and I have to ask you why you choose that final song. Hope there's someone to end the movie. Was it a personal choice or something else?
We felt that we had such a beautiful score, but we felt in the end, also with the last scene, we wanted the movie to kind of lift off to a kind of more heightened level, because or more philosophical almost, and also very emotional. And I just felt this song really is so on the point, and that's the question or the hope we all have to have in the end of our life. Hope we hope that somebody will be there for us. And for a lot of people, it will be a nurse, if they're still nurses. A lot of people die in hospitals. A lot of people don't die at home with their loved ones surrounding their bed or in their sleep. Like, a lot of people have these beautiful fantasies of how they want to die. But in fact, a lot of people in their last moments are in hospitals, and there's usually a nurse with them. And so I felt the song really the song transports that message. And I also wanted to show, because I was very touched when I talked to the nurses, that they say when somebody dies on a ward, they very often take that person home with them. You don't leave your job. Like, you can't just forget that. Very often they are with you in a way. And it's always a death is always a big event, even if you work as a nurse, we forget that you never get used. It doesn't become something casual. It's a huge event. And if you're there with that person, it affects you. So it was really important, to show this moment between her patient and her, but also this moment of forgiveness and connection, and Floria, being with somebody, and showing how those two, in a way, were the ones who suffered the most from how systemic the systemic problems in nursing. It's not just the nurse, it's also the patient. And so I wanted there to be a lot of space for people to feel and think about this.
I remember an old book. When your patient dies, you gain other patients, which are its relatives. So
yes,
your work doesn't end.
Yeah, that's very true.
Well,
yeah.
So it goes to the heart straight. The whole movie, but the final song, yes, it goes straight to the heart. Well, we can wrap up the podcast. And I read a short interview about you, and it said cinema is telling stories. And well, I'm not a film expert, but you have a gift for telling stories, and with detail, with emotion. And as I said in the beginning, your movie is a manifesto of nursing. And again, I would like to thank you for your work, and you and your whole team, Leonie and the other actors and actresses. And thank you again. Really, thank you.
Thank you for having me. And I hope the movie, helps you, that you can use it to raise consciousness also with politicians. I've also been approached by Italian nurses on Instagram. A young Italian nurse wrote to me about how exhausted she is, and how she loved the movie, and how hopeless she feels. That she's going to leave the job, and that she loves her job, but she just can't do it anymore. She said it's just soul crushing and physically so exhausting, and she felt so alone with it. And it really, it broke my heart, and it was clear she's a young woman. She has energy. She loves her job, and she can't do it because it's just too extreme. And I just really hope that the movie can help, in a little way, or that politicians notice, that helps the unions, to raise awareness, and to use it to create more awareness and discussions around this topic.
Nicola, would you like to say something?
Yeah, sure. I'm agree. I think when we talk with someone who doesn't understand, usually we say, "Come and see our work." Now with this movie, you can really come and see.
Yeah.
but it's also no. You give you the. you talk about nurses, but healthcare policies, human relationship in healthcare. So you really help us, but it's also a great picture, a great movie, a great is a great movie for everyone. I want to say this is not only a question of policies, it's only a question of nurses. Is a really great movie in all the point of view. And so thank you again for all this level of your work.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, Petra, I have to get back to Italian to
Yes,
close,
ok, andiamo.
to close the
Grazie
episode.
mille per avermi invitato a parlare sul podcast e tanti auguri per tutto.
Grazie mille ancora, tanti auguri anche a te per la tua carriera e per i tuoi lavori. E grazie anche a Nicola che ci
Grazie
ha accompagnato
a voi,
in questa bellissima, piacevole chiacchierata. E questo è Ordine di Opinioni, il podcast dell'Ordine delle Professioni Infermieristiche di Bologna. Iscrivetevi ai canali social di Ordine di Opinioni per restare connessi, per vedere le nostre attività. Grazie ancora a tutti, grazie Petra per aver raccontato con bellezza e straordinaria umanità e realtà il nostro lavoro. Grazie.
Grazie a voi. Ciao.